Alright, so Elfego Baca might not be a name everyone's familiar with, but he's been on screen a few times. Most people, if they have heard of him, only know of this crazy shootout that made him famous. We're going to talk about that today, but I also want to dig into some of the lesser known and honestly crazier parts of his life. So, go grab a drink, sit back, let's dive into the wild life of Elfego Baca of New Mexico. Let's start from the top. Elfego Baca was born in 1865, right around the end of the Civil War in New Mexico. Not long after he was born, his family moved to Topeka, Kansas. When he was about 12, his whole life changed. His mom, sister, and one of his brothers all died from some plague. His dad, Francisco, didn't stick around long after that. He packed up, headed back to New Mexico, but left Elfego behind in Kansas at an orphanage. Francisco eventually became a marshal, and when Elfego turned 15, he left the orphanage and headed back to New Mexico, just in time to see his dad get locked up for fifth-degree murder. Apparently, there was some sort of drunken brawl, and Francisco shot into the crowd, killing somebody. So, the state's plan was to ship him off to Kansas State Penitentiary, but Elfego and another kid broke his dad and 3 other guys out of the jail. And then took his dad to El Paso so he could cross into Mexico if he needed to. Now fast forward, Elfego was about to turn 18. The sheriff rides up, chasing some rowdy Texas Cowboys who were shooting up the town of Socorro. The sheriff asked Elfego to join the chase, and because Elfego was already on horseback and strapped, he jumps right in and ends up shooting one of the Cowboys. A few months after that, Elfego was working at a general store owned by the mayor. The mayor's brother-in-law was the sheriff over in Frisco, Texas. He tells Elfego about how the town's going to hell with the Texas Cowboys treating the Hispanic locals like dirt. One of them even tied a guy to a post and used him for target practice. And he's too scared to do anything about it. Elfego calls out the sheriff right then and there, telling him he should be ashamed to call himself a lawman. The sheriff laughed, took off his badge, and essentially told him, "All right, tough guy, you try it." And Elfego's like, "I will show the Texans there is at least one Mexican in the country that is not afraid of an American cowboy." So he makes himself a fake badge, hops on his horse, and heads to Frisco, about 130 miles away. When Elfego gets to town, he walks into a bar and sees a cowboy named Charlie McCarty showing off his gun, making Hispanic folks dance by shooting at their feet. McCarty even shoots off Elfego's hat right off his head. Now, if you know anything about Elfego, messing with him like that, big mistake. Elfego doesn't waste any time. He flashes his fake badge, disarms McCarty, and tells everyone in the bar that they have to the count of 3 to get out, or he's going to shoot somebody. Some of the Cowboys laugh, saying a Mexican can't even count to 3. So Elfego, without missing a beat, yells 1, 2, 3, and fires a few warning shots at the door. A bullet hits a horse, the horse falls, and one of the Cowboys is crushed to death. Another guy gets hit in the knee, and everybody else backs off real quick. The next day, the Cowboys came back, but this time they ask Elfego if they can settle things civilly. They want McCarty to be tried for his crimes, and Elfego agrees. McCarty gets fined $5, barely a slap on the wrist. But then, the tables turn, and Elfego finds himself wanted for questioning over the cowboy that got crushed by the horse. Elfego wasn't exactly the wait around type, so he sneaks out the courthouse and hides in this little adobe shack. And that's where the legendary Frisco War shootout happens. About 80 men surround the shack and fire off more than 4,000 bullets in 36 hours. You can imagine the chaos. Dust flying everywhere, bullets thudding into walls, and Elfego just sitting there, cool as ever, waiting for his chance to fire back. Elfego's inside, outnumbered and outgunned, but every once in a while he fires back. It's basically a game of survival at this point for him. But the townfolk, being, good old Wild West, they're treating the whole thing like a show. They climb up some hills and watch the shootout from a distance. At one point, one of the Cowboys tries using a stove door as a shield. The guy probably thought he was a genius, until Elfego shot just above his head, sending him running back. When night falls, the Cowboys start tossing Old West versions of Molotov cocktails onto the roof, and part of it collapses. They assume Elfego's dead, call it a night, and plan to check the body in the morning. But the next morning, they wake up to the smell of tortillas and coffee. Elfego is alive. The Cowboys start shooting again, but soon after, a sheriff from Socorro shows up and convinces Elfego to surrender. Elfego being Elfego, he agrees on 2 conditions. 1, he gets to keep his guns, and 2, his trial has to be in Socorro. After the trial, Elfego is acquitted, claiming self-defense. The bullet-riddled door and broom handle were pretty convincing evidence that this guy was just trying to survive. After the shootout, he became sheriff, marshal, and even lawyer. His approach to law enforcement was unique, we'll say. He'd send letters to outlaws that went something like this. "Dear sir, please come in on such and such date and give yourself up. If you don't, I'll know you intend to resist arrest and will feel justified in shooting you on sight when I come after you. Yours truly, Sheriff Elfego Baca." At one point, he found himself smack in the middle of the Mexican Revolution. And this is the part most people don't know about. First, some quick backstory. The Mexican Revolution kicks off in 1910, and there are 2 major players I'll be mentioning: Pancho Villa, the famous revolutionary, and Victoriano Huerta, a general who took over Mexico after the president and vice president were assassinated. Elfego ends up involved when one of Huerta's generals, Salvador Salazar, crosses into the United States in 1914. Salazar was being chased by Pancho Villa's forces, and after crossing the border into Presidio, Texas, he got arrested for violating U.S. neutrality laws. Huerta knew about Elfego's reputation, so he personally requested him to represent Salazar and try to get him out. Elfego, being Elfego, heads to D.C. to try and work his magic, but instead of getting Salazar out, Elfego somehow manages to add perjury charges to the mix. Eventually, Salazar ends up getting moved to a county jail in New Mexico. 4 days after Salazar is transferred, some masked men break into the jail, tie up the sheriff, and bust Salazar out. They speed off in a car, last seen heading south towards El Paso, never to be seen or heard from again. Now, Elfego gets charged with conspiracy in the jailbreak, but Elfego, being a smart guy, he had an alibi. He was at a saloon during the breakout, even asking the time so he could set his watch, and witnesses confirmed this. Elfego got off the hook, but here's where things get even better. Before all this went down, Elfego had some history with Pancho Villa. They had a bit of a falling out after Elfego represented him, and somehow, Elfego managed to steal one of Pancho Villa's prized rifles. And of course, Pancho wasn't exactly thrilled about that. And when he found out that Elfego was representing Salazar, who's on the opposite side of the revolution, Villa lost it. He put a 30,000 bounty on Elfego's head. And Elfego, being the clever guy he was, came up with a scheme to collect the bounty on himself. He actually planned to have himself delivered to Pancho Villa, but escape and collect the reward. Of course, somebody tipped off Pancho because, well, Elfego wasn't the only one playing mind games. So the plan didn't work. But Elfego didn't walk away empty-handed. He managed to make $30,000 for representing Salazar. In addition to sheriff, marshal, school superintendent, lawyer, and private detective, Elfego ran for Congress when New Mexico became a state in 1912. He didn't win, but he did manage to get a significant number of Hispanic voters out to the polls. He was a big supporter of Republican Senator Bronson Cutting, writing columns in a Spanish newspaper praising his efforts. And even though Elfego never got into office, his influence in New Mexico politics was solid. He also dabbled in mining, and for a while, he worked as a bouncer at a nightclub just across the border in Mexico. Despite everything, From shootouts to political scandals, he lived to a ripe old age. He didn't go down in a blaze of glory like a lot of Old West figures. Instead, he lived out his days peacefully, passing away in 1945 at the age of 80. And even though he's often overshadowed by bigger names in history, his story is one of grit, guts, and a whole lot of luck.
In the land of big men, when this great West was wild, Elfego was small and his nature was mild. And the legend was that, like El Gato the cat, 9 lives had Elfego El Gato. He dared to stand up to the toughest of men. He faced all their 6 guns again and again. All the people in town and the folks all around sing the praise of Elfego El Gato. Elfego was wise and Elfego was strong. Elfego El Gato, who made right from wrong. And the legend was that, like El Gato the cat, 9 lives had Elfego.